And here we are, ladies and gentlemen. We are finally down at the creek again. As I've recently stated, it's been quite the while since we've been down here last, and I believe I said this, but it's good to get your feet back in the water. And that's exactly what I'm doing here. I'm getting my feet back in the water. Now, I believe we're here for one reason, and one reason only. And that is, today marks January 22nd, 2026. Off the right bat, I must say, I believe to have run into a drunk lady sitting in her car, and it's her birthday today. And as I was walking down the street from the bookstore, the lady said, "Well, aren't you a gentleman?" And I said, "Oh yes, and you're quite the lady." She said, "What?" She poked her head out the window. And I said, "Well, you're quite the lady." And she said, "Oh, you're quite the gentleman." I said, "Well, you're the most beautiful lady around." And she said, "Oh, well, you're quite the gentleman. How about we both get coffee, and I don't even drink coffee." And she told me that, and she told me, "I need a date like you." And I laughed so hard inside my body, I had to keep it, and I said, "Well, really?" And she said, "Oh, yeah. My family's taken me up here for some dinner. It's my birthday today." And I said, "Well, happy birthday." And I said, and she said, "Oh, you're quite the gentleman." And I remember so much. She looked like she was in her 40s. She sounded like my aunt. And I haven't heard from her months. But I believe, she must have been drunk already. I gotta say it. She must be down a bottle of more than 3 bottles of Jack Daniels if her tolerance is that high. 'Cause I believe that she can't tell the difference from afar unless I dress that good. Which obviously, I guess I do. But anyways, there's I can't even explain to you how much I laughed. So and I said, "Have a great night. God bless you." She said, "All right." And I walked away, and I laughed to the end of the road. And then I turned the corner, gone down the steps, and I said, "I'm going to have to say that." But, let's roll back time a little bit, about 20 minutes. Madame Lockwood, I believe I've spoken to you about her. A nice grandma. She's spoken to her daughter, then her granddaughter, and she's a sophomore in Grand County. And me and her talked a lot about philosophy and mercenary work overseas. And, I told her, once I get out of this joint, and that's where I'm headed, I made up my mind. Either I would be gone in the next 10 years, or I'd be living until I was, till the grave, till I'm old and tired and grayer than an old bark tree. But I'd say that, when I told her I wrote my memoirs with a piece of encouragement, she said, "Oh, well, we have a good thought on you." And I said, "Well, you always need some good thoughts in your head, or else you won't be getting anywhere." That's what I said. And, she said, "That's good." And then, she called her husband, and about 5 minutes, 10 minutes later, he came and he brought Lola, the nice little fluffy dog. She's very cute, little pink collar. I think there was a bow tie on it before, but I think she chewed it up. But, after so long, of being there, I shook his hand. I promptly, left afterward. I said my thank yous. And now I have a packet of pumpkin spice tea. I don't know how I do it. Really, I don't know how I do it. But, as I said promptly, when I left, I was like, I really need to listen to my thoughts more. And then I realized, well, last time I listened to my thoughts, I landed myself in a mental hospital. But, there's nothing more I can share about that. But, we all have intricate thoughts. Of course, I believe that in my time of intrigue with the studies of my own psychology and brain works, there's only so much you can do when you're older, younger, but I don't know. There's life and there's death. And I must tell you, if you have listened this far, once you follow a path of life, it will significantly get harder. And let me tell you this. Once you choose life, you have to have that encouragement. You have to have that self-esteem to further induce yourself in the studies of your own life, to grow old, to live happily. But I believe, after all this time, eventually comes death. a death of something in life grows you tremendously, because you have to understand that sacrifice is the only way you can get further in life. Is one of the only ways, I'd say. Correct me on that. But once you find yourself in that midst of intrigue and great reflection, understand this: life cannot be death. Listen to your thoughts greatly. And grow them. May there always be a road you take, or a railroad you get on. You travel. You can travel by plane, car, train. You know, now there's going to be flying cars, which I doubt there will. But eventually, as I said before in my last public context, life will come eventually after death. Because, must I answer you this? If the grasses can grow again in a valley of destruction, then so can you in the concrete jungles of the city or the vast fields of the plains. And as I always say, to the one I love, and to the one I miss dearly, you are greater than myself, and you will always be the best person on my thought, on my mind, and to the deepest parts of my mind and soul. This is AJ as your press director, but this story comes from good old Bob, a working man, though poor in decision. L93.5. Thank you for listening, and have a great and wonderful rest of your evening, night. Stay warm, and remember, there's always going to be a person that loves you.